A Werewolf Romance Audiobook, written by Joyce Meyer. They say a wolf who cannot shift is not truly a wolf at all. In my pack, they had a word for it. Ashborn, the walking dead, the ones whose inner fire had been extinguished, leaving nothing behind but a hollow human shell dressed in Lycan skin. I know what it feels like, because they made me one. Not by accident, not through carelessness. They looked me in the eye. All 5 of them, my alpha, my beta, my bonded warriors, the pack I had bled for, the family I had loved beyond reason, and they performed the Ashrite, the ancient rite of severance. They reached into the sacred bond that tethered my wolf to my soul, and they burned it to ash while I screamed. I survived. That was my first mistake in their eyes. The second was crawling to the gates of the Obsidian Kingdom with nothing but rage keeping me alive, and collapsing at the feet of the most dangerous Lycan king in the known world. King Corvus Veilborn did not turn me away. He did not call me a broken thing, a cautionary tale, a lesson in what happens to wolves who ask too many questions. He knelt in the frozen mud beside me, pressed his hand over my chest, where the ember of my wolf had nearly gone dark, and breathed life back into the flame. But he did not give me something I already had. He gave me something I had never been allowed to keep: power. This is the story of how a pack tried to bury me, and how I became the thing they should have feared from the beginning. Prologue. The Ashrite. 3 years ago. The stones of Iron Hollow Keep had not changed in the 300 years since the Veyron Pack first claimed them as their own. They were ancient, black with centuries of torch smoke, fitted together so tightly that not even the mountain wind found purchase between them. In summer, they held the cold of winter inside them, and in winter they held nothing at all, just the indifferent weight of permanence. I had loved those stones once. I had grown up pressing my small hands flat against them, feeling the vibration of the pack through the walls, the rumble of shifting wolves, the percussion of training blades, the laughter from the great hall that rolled through the keep like a warm tide. Those stones had been home, safety, pack. Now I was chained to them. Iron manacles, silver-laced, of course, enough to suppress my shift, but not enough to kill, which meant they had thought this through. They had planned it carefully. The realization settled into my chest like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking slowly, touching nothing on the way down. Alpha Dravik stood in the center of the ritual circle, his face carved from the same indifference as the walls. He was a large man, broad in the way of old bloodlines, with gray beginning at his temples, and eyes that had always reminded me of flint, capable of producing fire, but never warmth. I had spent years trying to earn warmth from those eyes, years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of swallowing my own instincts when they conflicted with his orders. That was, I now understood, precisely the problem. "You know why we're here," he said. It was not a question, it was a frame, the first sentence of a narrative he had already written, in which I was the villain and he was the reluctant arbiter of justice. I looked past him to the others arranged around the circle. Seren, the beta, who had been my sparring partner for 6 years and had the nerve to not meet my eyes. Mira and Kaz, bonded warriors who had shared my firewatch during the eastern border conflicts. Old Thessaly, the pack seer, who was the only one watching me directly, and whose expression I could not read. And last, standing furthest from the torchlight, arms crossed, face deliberately blank, Rael, my mate, or rather, the man who had once claimed to be. "You've been communicating with the Obsidian Kingdom, sharing pack intelligence, undermining my authority, creating division among the lower ranks." "I sent 1 letter," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "To request a trade negotiation because our food stores are depleted and 3 pups died last winter from illness we could not afford to treat. That is not betrayal. That is survival." It is contact with our enemies without alpha authorization. It is precisely the kind of action that someone takes when their alpha refuses to hear them. The circle went very still. I had known, somewhere beneath the courage, that saying it plainly would cost me. But I had also spent 3 years of careful, strategic silence watching children bury their littermates, watching our warriors limp through training on injuries that never fully healed, watching Dravik consolidate power while the pack withered at its edges. I was not willing to perform contrition for the crime of caring. Dravik studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, as if I had confirmed something. "Begin," he said. Dessalie was the one who stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, I noticed. That small tremor in a woman who had faced blood moons and border wars without flinching, that was when I understood the full shape of what was about to happen. "Thessalie," my voice cracked on her name, "you don't have to—" "Forgive me, child," she whispered. "The Ashrite is not something the Lycan texts describe in clinical terms. They call it a severance, a sundering, a correction. What they do not say, what no text I had ever read had thought to mention, is that it feels, from the inside, like being set on fire. Not metaphorically. The bond between a Lycan and their wolf is not simply instinct or biology. It is a living thing, a second soul housed in the same body, a flame that burns in the chest that, once lit, is meant to burn for a lifetime. The Ashrite does not extinguish that flame gently. It consumes it, feeds it accelerant, and forces it to burn so hot, so fast, that it devours itself. I heard myself screaming, from a great distance, as though it were someone else. My wolf, the silver-gray creature I had run as since my first shift at 13, the part of me that had always been the most honest version of myself, fought. She clawed at the bond. She howled. She refused. And then she went quiet. Not the quiet of sleep, the quiet of aftermath, the quiet of ruins. When I came back to myself, I was on my knees on the stone floor. The chains had been removed at some point. My hands were pressed flat against the cold rock, and I was shaking so violently my teeth rattled. The circle had broken. Most of them had moved away. Only Rael remained, standing a few feet from me, and I made myself look up at him, made myself find his face. "Why?" I asked. Just that. Something moved across his expression, too fast to name, too complicated to believe in. Then it was gone, and what remained was nothing I recognized. "Because you would never have stopped," he said. He walked out. The torch on the nearest wall guttered in the draft from the closing door, and then steadied, burning on, indifferent, the way stones do. I stayed on the floor of Iron Hollow Keep for a long time. Then I got up. That was the first decision I made as an Ashborn, the first act of defiance in a new kind of war. I got up, and I walked out, and I did not look back. Before we continue, we would love to know where you are listening from, whether it is Lagos, Nairobi, London, New York, Toronto, Sydney, or anywhere else in the world. Please tell us in the comments. We would also love for you to hit the thumbs up button, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe for more content like this. Chapter 1. The Girl Without a Wolf. The Obsidian Kingdom earned its name from the volcanic rock that formed its foundations. Black, razor-edged stone pulled from the earth's own fury, cut and fitted by hands that had been building in this mountain range for centuries before my pack ever claimed Iron Hollow. Where Veyron architecture was gray and cold and practical, the walls of the Obsidian Kingdom were black and sharp and beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. I had not planned to make it this far. Truthfully, I had not planned beyond the gate. In the 3 days since the Ashrite, I had walked north with nothing but the clothes I'd been wearing during the ritual: a training tunic, leather trousers, boots not intended for mountain terrain, and the dim, nauseating awareness of my own absence. That is the strangest part of being Ashborn, the part that breaks people before the cold or the hunger does. You keep reaching for something that is no longer there. A sense, a warmth, a presence that was so integral to your experience of yourself that without it, you keep stumbling, kept checking over your shoulder, kept expecting the silver-gray creature to simply reappear and prove the whole thing a terrible mistake. She didn't. The northern pass had been brutal. I had not been able to shift to conserve warmth, not been able to use the enhanced senses that would have warned me away from the 2 ice crack collapses and the territorial marker that nearly walked me into a rogue patrol. I was running on human instincts and 3 days of accumulated fury, which turned out to be more effective than I would have predicted. The gates of the Obsidian Kingdom were the first sign of warmth I had encountered since leaving Iron Hollow. Not physical warmth. The torches bracketed into the black stone pillars were functional rather than generous, but the warmth of order, of structure, of a place that had been built to last. I remember the exact moment my legs gave out. I remember the smooth, volcanic stone of the entryway coming up to meet my face, and the distant, abstract thought that this was embarrassing, that I had survived the Ashrite and 3 days in mountain terrain only to collapse on someone's doorstep like a poorly delivered package. I remember a voice, low, controlled, carrying the particular quality of a person who does not need to raise their volume to command a room. Don't move her. Get Physician Aldra and then get out of my way. And then, closer, directly above me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of proximity, even in my half-conscious state. You're safe now. I have you. I did not believe him. I had been told safe before. But I was also out of fight, so I let the darkness take me. I woke in a room that smelled of cedar and heated stone, and something underneath both, a deep, complex scent that my absent wolf could not catalog, but that my human instincts responded to with an unwilling alertness. The room was not lavish. Stone walls, obsidian, smooth and dark, reflecting the firelight from a hearth large enough to stand in. A single window, high up, showing a rectangle of pale winter sky. The bed was wide and functional, the linens heavy wool and dark gray. There was a chair beside the fire, and in it sat the largest man I had ever seen. Not large in the way of a person who has trained for size, large in the way of something that was simply built differently, the way old mountains are large, not effortfully, not performatively, just fundamentally. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees, watching me with the patience of a person who has been waiting without minding the wait. His eyes were the first thing that fully registered. Not their color, dark gray, almost black, but their quality. They were entirely, unnervingly present. Not the fixed stare of surveillance, but the focused attention of someone who is genuinely interested in what they are looking at. He was watching me wake up, and he was doing it without any of the predatory calculation I had learned to read in alpha eyes. "You've been asleep for 18 hours, he said. You have 2 cracked ribs, moderate frostbite on both feet, and a level of dehydration my physician described as aggressive. She also noted something else." He paused. "An Ashrite." The word landed the way it always did now, like a fist to the sternum. "She said she had never seen one up close before," he continued, his tone careful and neutral. "She said it was the most precise piece of cruelty she had encountered in 30 years of practice. Those were her exact words." I said nothing. "My name is Corvus Valeborn," he said. "This is my kingdom. You are a guest here, not a prisoner, and you are not obligated to tell me anything about yourself that you do not wish to share. However, I would like to know your name." There was something almost absurd about the formality of it. Sitting up in bed in someone's keep, wrapping borrowed blankets around a body that still felt wrong and hollow, being offered the small dignity of a proper introduction by a man who could have simply questioned me. "Seren," I said. "Seren Voss, former second of the Veyron Pack." "Former." The word tasted like ash. "Former," he repeated, as if he heard what I wasn't saying. "And you came north." "I didn't have many options." "You had the option to go south or east or to stop moving entirely." He said it without challenge, stating a fact. "You came to the Obsidian Kingdom specifically." "I sent a letter," I said, 3 months ago, about trade negotiations. It was never answered." Something shifted in his expression. "I received that letter." "Then you know why—" "I received it, and I was composing a response when I received a second communication from your Alpha informing me that you had been acting without authorization and that any correspondence from Ironhollow should be directed exclusively through him." He watched me process this. "I was waiting to understand the situation more fully before responding. I see now that I waited too long." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest. I appreciated that. "What do you intend to do with me?" I asked. "That depends significantly on what you intend to do with yourself," Corvus said. He rose from the chair, and he was, standing, even more substantial than he had appeared sitting. The firelight caught the angles of his face, the severity of his jaw, the line of an old scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. He did not soften those features by smiling. He did not seem to need to. "Rest, eat, heal. After that, we will talk about what comes next." He moved toward the door, and I spoke before I could stop myself. "They said I sent intelligence to an enemy. I didn't. I sent a letter asking for help because children were dying. That was the whole of it." Corvus paused with his hand on the doorframe. He did not turn around. "I know," he said. "How could you possibly—" I read the letter. Now he looked back, and those dark eyes held something I wasn't ready to name. It was not the communication of someone acting against their pack. It was the communication of someone who loved their pack more than their Alpha was comfortable with. He left. The fire crackled. The stone walls held their warmth around me. For the first time in 3 days, I did not feel like I was standing in the ruins of myself. I felt, distantly and cautiously, like I was standing at the beginning of something.
Chapter 2. Stones Remember Everything. The Obsidian Kingdom was built vertically. Where most Lycan settlements spread outward, claiming territory in wide, visible sweeps, marking borders with patrols and scent markers and the sheer assertion of breadth, Corvus Valeborn's people had built upward into the mountain itself. Corridors spiraled through the volcanic rock. Great halls were carved from natural caverns and fitted with obsidian floors that caught firelight and held it. Bridges of black stone connected towers that jutted from the mountainside like teeth. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I had grown up being told it was an abomination. That was the first crack in the architecture of everything Drevik had built inside my head. In the 2 weeks following my arrival, I was given the southeast guest quarters. 3 rooms, a private hearth, access to the lower training yards during off hours. It was more space and more consideration than I had been shown as a ranking officer of my own pack. I kept waiting for the condition, the moment the generosity would reveal its hidden price. It didn't come. What came instead was Physician Aldra, a compact, sharp-eyed woman of middle age who had the bedside manner of someone who had decided long ago that honesty was more useful than comfort, and who checked my ribs and my frostbitten feet with brisk efficiency and told me the Ashrite damage was not permanent. Not permanent? I repeated. I had been told, in the single conversation I'd managed with Thessaly before the ritual, because, of course, Thessaly had explained it to me, because that was the cruelest form it could take, the seer who had watched me grow up walking me through the mechanism of my own destruction, that the severance was irreversible. "The texts your pack uses are 3 centuries out of date," Aldra said in the tone of someone who had been frustrated by this particular inadequacy for years. "The bond is damaged, significantly, but damage is not the same as destruction. Given time, the correct environment, and sufficient stimulus. What kind of stimulus? She set down her instruments and looked at me squarely. A strong enough pack bond, the kind generated by genuine trust, genuine belonging, the kind your wolf believed in before the severance. She paused. She is not gone, Seren. She is hiding. There is a difference. I sat with that for a long time after Aldra left. My first real conversation with Corvus outside of the sick room happened 12 days into my stay, in the obsidian corridor that connected the east wing to the council chambers. I had been mapping the keep, old habit, a second's instinct, knowing the architecture of any space you might need to move through quickly. He fell into step beside me without announcement, which told me he had known exactly where I was. "You've been to every corridor in the east wing," he said. "Habit," I said. "A second's habit." He did not make it sound like an accusation. "How long did you hold that rank?" 4 years. "And before that?" "Junior warrior, border patrol, reconnaissance." I glanced at him sideways. "I'm not going to spy for you if that's what this is leading to." He stopped walking. I stopped too, because when a person of his particular presence stops moving, the space reorganizes itself around the stillness. "I do not need a spy," he said. "I have excellent intelligence capabilities already, and I have no interest in using you as a tool." His eyes moved across my face with that same focused attention I had noticed in the sick room, not cataloging, not calculating, just looking. "Why does it matter who I am?" "Because you are in my kingdom, and the people in my kingdom matter to me." He said it simply, without rhetorical flourish, and it landed harder than any elaborate declaration would have.
"And because I have been watching you for 12 days move through my halls like someone expecting to be handed a bill for the hospitality at any moment, and it bothers me." I looked away. The corridor was cool and dark and very still. The obsidian walls reflected our two shapes back at us, distorted slightly by the natural irregularities in the stone. "Where I come from," I said carefully, "generosity always has a structure." "Yes," he said, "I know. I've read Dravak's territorial reports. The Veyron Pack, under his leadership, has operated as a closed system for 11 years, resources consolidated at the top, dissent managed through social pressure and ritual punishment, loyalty defined as agreement." He paused. "The Ashrite is the most extreme version of that management. They use it rarely because they have to. It requires the cooperation of the Pack's seer, and it leaves evidence. They would have only used it on someone they considered genuinely threatening." "I sent a letter," I said, and even now, 3 weeks removed from it, the absurdity of it tightened my throat. That was all I did. "You sent a letter that proved the Alpha's management was failing," Corvus said. "You documented in writing that children were dying under his watch and that you were capable of identifying solutions he had refused to pursue. That is not a minor act of insubordination. That is a direct challenge to his authority, and he treated it as such." He looked at me steadily. "He was right to be afraid of you. He was simply wrong about what to do with that fear." The words settled into me in a way I didn't have a container for yet. I had spent 3 weeks, longer, really. I had spent years, operating under the assumption that I had done something wrong, that there was something in me that was too much, too sharp, too unwilling to smooth itself into the shape that was required. Corvus was telling me that the thing they had tried to burn out of me was precisely the thing that had been worth keeping. I didn't know what to do with that, so I did what I had always done when I didn't know what to do. I kept moving. "Show me the East Tower," I said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the precursor to one, the expression a smile leaves behind when it hasn't fully committed yet. "This way," he said. Chapter 3. The Dead Flame. There is a particular kind of grief that does not announce itself. It does not arrive in waves. It does not make itself known through the obvious channels, the crying, the rage, the visible collapse that other people can recognize and respond to. It moves instead through the architecture of ordinary moments. The morning you reach for an instinct and find only silence. The evening you stand at the window and realize you cannot smell the forest the way you used to. The dream where you are running on 4 legs through deep snow and you wake up human and the loss is so specific, so physical that for a moment you cannot place it. This was the grief I was living in the 5th week of my time at the Obsidian Kingdom, when Corvus found me in the lower training yard at the hour most people were eating the morning meal. I was working through the blade forms I'd learned as a junior warrior, not fighting forms, not the offensive sequences designed to exploit a shifted opponent, but the older, simpler patterns that my first trainer had called the honest forms. Nothing about them required a wolf. They were pure human mechanics: weight, balance, extension, recovery. I had been at it for 2 hours. My arms were shaking. Corvus came through the yard gate and stopped a few feet away, watching without interrupting. He had learned in 5 weeks when to speak and when not to. That attentiveness, the capacity to read a person accurately and adjust accordingly, was something I had encountered very rarely, and it unsettled me in ways I was still cataloging. I finished the sequence and lowered the blade training. "I dreamed of running last night," I said, without turning around. "I know." He moved to the weapons rack beside me, selected a practice blade, tested its weight with the ease of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. "You've been down here since the 3rd hour. Did someone report to you, or do you have other means of knowing where I am at 3 in the morning? I was also awake at 3 in the morning. He moved to the center of the yard. "Spar with me." I looked at him. He was, as I had assessed since the day I woke in his keep, a great deal larger than me. He was also, almost certainly, one of the most powerful Lycans alive. The Obsidian Kingdom's reputation for military strength was not mythological. "That's not a fair contest," I said. "I'm not asking for a fair contest. I'm asking you to stop being careful and move." He settled into a guard position. "You've been moving like someone who was afraid of taking up space. I want to see the fighter your alpha was afraid of." I picked up the practice blade. I came at him harder than was probably wise. He was good, better than good. He moved with an efficiency that was almost frustrating. No wasted motion, no theatrical flourishes, just the absolute minimum required to be wherever he needed to be. But I had been training since I was 9 years old, and I had spent 4 years as a second reading opponents before they committed, and I was angry in a way that had been building for 5 weeks, looking for an outlet. I got through his guard twice. Both times, he stepped back and let me reset rather than countering to advantage. The 3rd time, I caught his wrist on the deflection and used his own momentum to put him off balance, and he went down to one knee with the practice blade across his throat. We were both breathing hard. "There she is," he said quietly. I stepped back and lowered the blade and tried to understand why my eyes were burning. "They told everyone I'd become unstable," I said, "after the Ashrite, that the operation had been necessary because I'd shown signs of aggression that threatened pack safety." I stared at the practice blade in my hand. "Drakovec will have filed the reports that way. By now, every pack that receives his communications will know me as a threat neutralized, the Ashborn who had to be corrected." Corvus stood. He was unhurried about it. "Let me tell you what my intelligence reports say about Seren Voss, former second of the Veyron Pack. 6 commendations for border service, a record of 0 civilian casualties during 3 conflict engagements, 2 documented instances of contradicting alpha orders in the field and being proven correct in both cases, a privately circulated petition signed by 23 pack members requesting leadership review, which I now understand was what preceded the Ashrite." He looked at me levelly. "That is not a record of instability," That is a record of integrity."
I didn't answer. The words were too large for the space I had available for them. Corvus was quiet for a moment. Then, "My pack bond is strong," he said. "The Obsidian Kingdom's bond is, by some measures, the strongest recorded in the Northern Territories. Aldra believes it is because we have never used coercion to maintain it." He paused. "She also believes it might be strong enough to reach you." I looked at him then. "Reach me?" I repeated. "Your wolf." He said it. Carefully, the way you say something you are not certain of but are not willing to be less than honest about. "The research suggests that a sufficiently strong, sufficiently genuine bond, freely chosen, not coerced, can reconstruct what the Ashrite breaks down. Not quickly, not easily, but—" "Aldra told me it wasn't permanent," I said. "She told me the same thing." He set down the practice blade and looked at me with those dark, present eyes. "What she did not tell you, because she is a scientist and does not deal in things she cannot yet measure, is that the bond that would be required is not a pack bond in the general sense. It would need to be personal, specific." A pause. "The kind of bond that does not work if the people involved are performing it rather than choosing it." The training yard was very quiet. Somewhere above us, the keep was waking up. I could hear the distant sounds of morning routines, boots on stone, the clang of the kitchen beginning its work. "You're not offering me a transaction," I said slowly. "No," he said. "I would not know how to offer you a transaction. Everything in my nature objects to the idea." He picked up both practice blades and returned them to the rack with the same unhurried precision he did everything. "I am telling you what is possible. What happens next is entirely your choice." He walked back toward the keep gate. "Corvus," I said. He stopped. "Why does it matter to you? Whether my wolf comes back, whether I stopped, reformulated. "You don't know me. I arrived on your doorstep 3 weeks removed from a ritual that my own pack performed to neutralize me. Why does any of this matter to you?" The pause that followed was long enough that I thought he might not answer. "Because I was present," he said, finally, "at the moment you decided to get up off the floor of whatever room they left you in and walk north alone, in the wrong boots, in the middle of winter, with no plan and nothing but the determination to still exist in the morning." He did not turn around. "Do you know how rare that is? That decision made in that condition? Most people don't make it." He went through the gate. I stood in the training yard for a while after that, in the cold, in the silence, with the first warmth I had felt in my chest in 5 weeks. Not the wolf's warmth, not yet, but something, the faintest beginning of an ember. Chapter 4. What Stone Keeps Warm. The Council of the Obsidian Kingdom met every 7 days in the great carved chamber at the keep's highest interior point. I was not invited to the 6th council session after my arrival, nor to the 7th. On the evening before the 8th, Corvus left a standing document on the desk in my quarters, a list of the session's agenda items, with a note in his own handwriting that said only, "If you have thoughts on item 4, I would value them." Item 4 was the Veyron Pack's increasing aggression toward neutral traders on the Southern Pass. I attended the council. There were 9 of them, senior advisors, pack elders, 2 military commanders, a trade representative. They received me with varying degrees of welcome. Commander Erin, a compact woman with a silver-streaked braid and eyes like a hawk, watched me with undisguised assessment for the entire first hour. I assessed her back, and we arrived, I thought, at a mutual respect. When item 4 was raised, I spoke. I knew Dravek's patterns. I knew how he thought about neutral territory as a temporary condition, a liminal space that would eventually be absorbed by whoever was willing to commit to the cost of holding it. I knew which routes he would prioritize and which he would consider expendable. I knew his timeline preferences, his escalation thresholds, the specific conditions under which he would pull back rather than commit.
I talked for 11 minutes. When I finished, the chamber was quiet in the particular way that follows useful information. You anticipated every move we've been uncertain about, Erin said. She did not sound hostile about it. I spent 4 years planning against exactly these kinds of decisions, I said, from the inside. That perspective is valuable, she said, not warmly, but honestly. Corvus said nothing during the session except to ask 2 clarifying questions. Both questions were precisely the right questions. I noticed that about him with increasing regularity. He asked the questions that opened space rather than closing it, the questions designed to generate understanding rather than confirm existing positions. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Erin fell into step beside me. "The king told us you were here," she said. "He didn't tell us you were useful. I didn't know I would be." "He believed you would be," she said. "There's a difference." She glanced at me sideways. "He hasn't been wrong yet, in my experience. That's either impressive or terrifying depending on your position relative to him." We walked in silence for a moment. "The Ashrite," she said, more quietly. "Years ago, before I came here, the pack used it on a warrior who had objected to a border decision that cost 5 lives. She was quiet for a moment. He never recovered. He left and no one heard from him again. "I'm told it's not permanent," I said. "I've been told that too, now." She stopped at the junction of 2 corridors. "The king's bond is genuine. I've been part of this pack for 14 years and I've felt it strengthen every year. Whatever Aldra is suggesting about reconstruction, about what's possible, I'd believe her here, and I'd believe him." She went left, I went right, toward my quarters, toward the window that looked out over the obsidian walls to the dark mountain beyond. I had been here for 7 weeks, and for the first time since the Ashrite, I was beginning to recognize myself in the reflection the walls gave back. The first time I felt it, the ember, actual and undeniable, was 3 weeks after the council session. I was in the keep's lower library, which was carved directly into the mountain and lit by suspended lanterns that swayed slightly in the draft from the ventilation channels, making the shadows move and breathe. I had been reading pack bond theory, original sources, some of them in dialects I had to work at, when Corvus came in. He sat across from me without asking if I minded the company, which was something I had noticed he never asked, not because he was presumptuous, but because he read the space accurately enough to know when his presence was welcome and acted accordingly. When he was wrong, which had happened twice, he simply left and returned at a different time without drama. He was reading something unrelated to what I was reading, and we sat in the library for 2 hours without exchanging more than a handful of sentences. And somewhere in the second hour, I looked up and found him looking at me with an expression that I recognized by then. Not the focused assessment of the early weeks, but something that had settled deeper, something quieter. And in my chest, beneath the place where the wolf had gone silent, in the specific hollow that the Ashrite had left behind, something moved. Not the wolf, not yet, but heat, actual warmth, the first that had not come from an external source. I put my hand flat over my sternum, the way Corvus had put his hand to my chest the night I arrived, and I felt it. An ember. Corvus looked at my hand, then up at my face. His expression did not change dramatically, but something in it went very still. "I felt that," he said quietly. "Through the bond? Through the beginnings of one." He closed his book and set it aside. His voice was careful. "Seren, I need to tell you something." "Then tell me." "The bond that is forming." He paused, and for the first time since I had known him, he seemed to be choosing his words with particular attention. "It is not simply the pack bond Aldra described. That would feel different, more distributed. What I am feeling is," another pause, "specific." I did not look away. "To me? To you?" The lanterns swayed. The shadows moved along the obsidian walls. Outside, the mountain wind made no sound through stone that had been here for centuries. "The last time someone looked at me the way you look at me," I said, "they stood in a circle while I burned." "I know."
That is not a simple thing to move past. I know that too. He did not reach for me. He did not lean forward. He stayed exactly where he was, across the library table, with his hands flat on the closed book and that focused patience he seemed to carry everywhere. I am telling you what I feel because you deserve honesty. What you do with it is entirely yours. I thought of Rael. I thought of the way he had stood at the edge of the torchlight and watched and done nothing. I thought of Corvus kneeling in the mud at his own gate, telling someone he did not know that she was safe. I don't know how to trust this yet, I said. Then we will go slowly, he said. We have time. I nodded, and we went back to our books, in the lantern light, with the ember in my chest burning steadily, small and new and entirely real.
Chapter 5. The Pack Drevek Forgot. The message arrived 2 months after that evening in the library. It was addressed to the Obsidian Kingdom in the formal diplomatic style, heavy parchment, red wax, the iron wolf seal of the Veyron Pack, and it contained, in Drevek's characteristically flat, bureaucratic prose, a request for the return of a former pack member currently residing without authorization in Obsidian territory. He named me specifically. I was in Corvus's study when Seren brought it in, and I watched him read it, and I watched his face do almost nothing, which, by now, I understood was the specific expression he wore when his reaction was significant, and he was deciding how to manifest it. He set the letter down. "He's calling me stolen property," I said. "He is calling you a resource that has been improperly removed from his accounting." Corvus looked at the letter for another moment, then looked at me. "He doesn't know about the council session, or about the training sessions. He doesn't know what you've been doing here. He knows I've been here, which means the trade routes are more porous than I thought, and I'll address that separately." He leaned back in his chair. "What he wants, functionally, is for you to be removed from a position where your knowledge of his operation is available to people who might use it against him. He wants to know where I am, so he can finish what the Ashrite started," I said, more bluntly. Corvus was quiet. "I won't go back," I said. It came out completely steady. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever diplomatic mathematics this creates for you, whatever the cost of refusing his request, Seren," his voice was level, "I am going to write back to Alpha Drevek and inform him that you are a guest of the Obsidian Kingdom and have accepted a position within my advisory structure, and that any further communication on this matter should be directed through formal channels, where it will wait as long as I decide it should wait." He picked up a writing instrument. "The diplomatic mathematics, as you put it, are not your concern. They should be. They're going to be my fault. They are going to be a consequence of Drevek's decisions," he said, starting with the decision to perform an Ashrite on a second who had given him 6 years of commendable service. "The letter I am writing is a natural consequence of that choice. None of it belongs to you." He looked up. "Is that clear?" I thought about Ironhollow, about the walls I had loved and the pack I had bled for and the mate who had looked away. There are 23 people in the Veyron Pack who signed the petition. They're still there. If Drevek escalates, if he decides that the Obsidian Kingdom's refusal is an act of aggression, then we will deal with that as it develops. He set down the writing instrument. "Are you asking me to consider them?" "I'm telling you they exist. What you do with that information is your decision." He looked at me for a long moment. "How many of them are warriors?" he asked. 14 of the 23. "And they have names?" "I know all their names." I paused. "And their families, and their skills, and which of them have been waiting for a reason to leave?" A silence. "Seren," Corvus said, without raising his voice. She appeared in the doorway. She had, I suspected, been in the corridor throughout. "Here," he said. "Open a file. Seren will give you the information. Treat it as priority intelligence." He picked up the writing instrument again. "And send a secondary message to our contact at the neutral traders post in the southern pass. Quietly." Irene met my eyes and gave me a nod that was as close to approval as I had seen from her in 3 months. I followed her out of the study and began, for the first time, to think about what it meant to fight back. The 14 warriors arrived over the course of the following 2 months, in 1s and 2s, by different routes. Some came directly, some arrived through intermediaries, some were escorted by Obsidian patrols who had been quietly positioned on the northern pass. They came with nothing except the clothes they had left in and the knowledge of what they were leaving behind. I was at the gate for every arrival. There were reunions that I had to walk away from because the strength of them overwhelmed something in my chest that was still fragile, still newly reassembled. Mira came on the 3rd week, with Cass 2 days behind her, and when they both saw me, they went very still for a moment, and then Mira said, "We should have stopped it," in a voice that had the quality of a confession that had been building for months, and I had nothing to give her except the truth. "You couldn't have, but you're here now." Old Thessaly came on the 6th week. She came alone, in the middle of a cold night, and I found her at the gate wrapped in 3 layers of wool with a pack that contained, among other things, every text on pack bond theory and Ashrite research that the Veyron library held. "They'll know immediately," I said, looking at the books. "Yes," she said. "It will accelerate Dravek's timeline." "Yes." She looked at me with those ancient, unreadable eyes. "I didn't bring them for you, child. I brought them for the Obsidian Kingdom's physician and whatever she is trying to do." A pause. "I should have intervened. I should have refused the ritual. I was afraid of what refusal would cost me, and I chose my own safety over your life. That is the truth of what I did, and I will not dress it in better language." She looked at the keep meat. "I cannot undo it, but I can be useful." I stepped back from the gate. "Welcome to the Obsidian Kingdom," I said. Chapter 6. The Flame Returns. Aldra came to my quarters on a morning when the mountain outside had been white with fresh snowfall, and the keep smelled of wood smoke and warming stone. She carried Thessaly's books under one arm and wore the expression of someone who has spent several sleepless nights discovering that they had been missing something obvious. "The original Ashrite texts," she said, setting the books on my table without preamble, "are incomplete. Not intentionally. They were written by practitioners who understood the mechanism but not the underlying physiology. They documented the severing process thoroughly and the recovery process not at all, because they had never observed a recovery." "Has anyone?" "3 documented cases," she said. "All 3 involved prolonged exposure to a high-resonance pack bond combined with what the texts call, and I find this language imprecise to the point of uselessness, a chosen anchoring relationship, a bond that the wolf herself selects." She looked at me over the books. "The wolf is not gone, Seren. I told you this. She is in retreat, and she will come back if she believes, if you believe, that what she is coming back to is worth the vulnerability of existing in." I understood what she was telling me. "How long?" I asked. "The 3 cases varied considerably. The shortest was 4 months from the establishing of the anchoring relationship to the first successful shift. The longest was over a year." She paused. "You have been here nearly 6 months, and the king's bond reads differently to me now than it did when you arrived." After she left, I went to find Corvus. He was in the training yard, not sparring, just moving through the blade forms alone, the morning light on the obsidian walls throwing everything into sharp relief. I watched him for a moment from the gate before he noticed me. There was something in the observation that had become familiar. This person who held enormous power and moved through it with almost no performance, no requirement that the world arrange itself to confirm his significance. He lowered the blade when he saw me. "Aldra came to see me," I said. "I know. I asked her to share what she found." "You've been waiting. You've known about the anchoring relationship concept and you've been You've been letting me arrive at it in my own time? Yes, he said. No deflection, no apology. That's either very patient or very calculated, I said. It is neither, he said. It is simply what is right. You came here having had every choice removed from you by force. The least I could do was not replicate that structure. He held the practice blade loosely at his side. I did not want to be the next person who decided what was good for you. The morning was very quiet. Somewhere in the keep, the sound of the arriving shift change, boots on stone, voices, the ordinary percussion of a community waking up, reached us faintly. I chose this, I said. I want you to know that. Not because it's practical, not because it's strategic, not because you are the only available option. I looked at him steadily. I choose it because you have been, exactly what you are, exactly the same every day from the first morning I woke up in your keep, and I have never in my life known what to do with that kind of consistency, but I find that I want to. Corvus set down the practice blade. He crossed the training yard and stood in front of me, close enough that the warmth I had learned to associate with his proximity was very present, and he put his hand against my sternum the way he had in the mud at the gate all those months ago. I can feel the ember, he said quietly. It's been there for a while. It's brighter this morning. I put my hand over his. The obsidian walls caught the light around us, the ancient stone that remembered everything, that had been here long before either of us, and would be here long after. I'm ready, I said. And in the warm, certain space between us, not dramatically, not with fire or thunder, but with the quiet irreversibility of something that has been building toward its own truth for a long time, I felt her come back. My wolf, silver gray and warm, and very much herself, unfolding from wherever she had been sheltering, pressing against the inside of my chest with a recognition so fierce it stole my breath. Not lost, not gone. Hidden, as Aldra had said, waiting for evidence that the world was safe enough to exist in fully. And here it was, a man with his hand over my heart, and a kingdom built on honest stone, and 23 people who had walked through mountains to be part of something worth being part of. I shifted for the first time in 6 months. The silver-gray wolf that shook herself awake in the center of the training yard was the same wolf I had been before the Ashrite, but different in the way of things that have survived something, more present, more grounded, more entirely herself than she had ever been. She stood in the thin winter sun on the obsidian stone and lifted her head and howled, and the sound of it rang off the black walls and filled every corridor in the keep. Corvus shifted beside her. His wolf was black as the walls themselves, massive and steady, and he did not crowd her or test her limits. He simply stood beside her, present and unhurried, and completely solid. The pack bond snapped fully into place. Every Lycan in the Obsidian Kingdom would have felt it, a strengthening, a new strand in the weave, something added to the collective warmth that kept them connected. Iron told me later that she had been in the middle of a strategy meeting when it happened, and that every person in the room had gone very still for a moment, and then Commander Aldris had said, without looking up from the maps, "About time." My wolf pressed her shoulder against Corvus's wolf, and he leaned back, and the training yard held both of them in the morning light, simple and true.
Chapter 7. What the Stones Build. Dravek's answer to the formal letter came at the worst possible time, 2 months after my wolves returned, in the deep winter, when the mountain passes were at their most treacherous and travel was restricted to the truly committed. He sent 20 warriors through the southern pass, not a diplomatic envoy, warriors in full battle configuration, bearing a message that said in its entirety, "Return our property, or the next communication will not be written." He knows he can't take this keep,
Iron said, spreading the intelligence report across the council table. The walls alone, even if he had 300 warriors, which he doesn't, the Obsidian Kingdom's fortifications are not a conventional engagement problem. He's not planning to storm us. He's planning to demonstrate that he's willing to commit to conflict, which he hopes will force a negotiation that ends with Seren's removal. I was at the table. So were the 14 former Veyron warriors, those who had full council access. So was Thessaly, whose knowledge of Dravek's ritual capabilities had proven invaluable. "He's also sending a message to the neutral packs," Mira said. She had settled into the Obsidian Kingdom's warrior structure with the ease of someone who had been waiting for an environment worth adapting to, that the Obsidian Kingdom can be pressured. If he gets any concession at all, he won't, Corvus said. The table went quiet. This is not a negotiation. Dravek is not owed a response to a threat, and he is not going to receive one. What he is going to receive is a consequence. He looked at Thessaly. The 23 who signed the petition, how many are still in Iron Hollow who want to leave? 16, she said. The other 7 left in the last 2 months through channels that were not ours. Can they move if we create a path? If the path appears within the next month, yes. After that, Dravek's security tightening will have progressed too far. Then we create a path. He looked around the table. I am not interested in a military engagement with the Veyron Pack. I am interested in removing Dravek's capacity to use fear as a management tool, which means removing the people he needs to fear, systematically, legally, one at a time. It was not the dramatic offensive anyone might have expected. It was instead exactly the kind of response that was difficult to counter, not a battle, but an erosion. And the 20 warriors at the Southern Pass, Iron asked, are cold, Corvus said. They will get colder. When they leave, and they will leave because they have no supply line and it's the middle of winter, the message they carry back will be that the Obsidian Kingdom did not respond to the threat because the Obsidian Kingdom did not find the threat credible. He looked at me across the table. Your thoughts? He'll read the non-response as contempt, which is worse than engagement from his perspective. His authority depends on being taken seriously. I thought about Dravek, about those flint-gray eyes, about the way he'd nodded when I'd given him what he needed to justify the Ashrite. He'll escalate again, harder. I expect so, Corvus said. You're prepared for that? We have been preparing for that since the first week you were here, he said simply. Long before it became personally relevant to me. The Veyron Pack's trajectory under Dravek's leadership has been toward regional destabilization for years. You accelerated our timeline for addressing it. You didn't create the problem. Mira looked at me across the table and said nothing, but the expression on her face said the thing I hadn't quite let myself fully believe. You were never the problem. The 16 left Iron Hollow over the course of 3 weeks, in groups of 2 and 3, along routes that Thessaly had memorized and Iron had confirmed were unmonitored. They arrived cold and certain and relieved in the particular way of people who had been waiting a long time to make a decision they already knew was right. Dravek's 20 warriors left the Southern Pass on the 14th day, as Corvus had predicted. What none of us predicted was Rael. He came alone in the last week of winter, and he came to the gate rather than through any of the protected routes, which meant he was identified by the outer patrol and escorted to the keep under close watch. I was in the training yard when Erin came to find me, and the expression on her face was the carefully neutral expression she wore when she had information that she thought might require a decision. Your former mate is at the gate, she said. He says he wants to speak with you. I stood very still for a moment. He's alone, she added. I know. I set down the training blade. Put him in the eastern receiving room, the one without exits, and stay nearby. Rael looked smaller than I remembered. That was the first thing I noticed when I came into the receiving room. Not physically smaller, he was the same height, the same build, but the particular quality he had always carried, that self-assurance that verged on imperviousness had contracted. He was sitting on the bench by the window, and he stood when I came in, and I could see him recalibrate against whatever he had expected. "Your wolf is back," he said, before anything else. "Yes. I can feel it. The resonance is different." He looked at me with an expression I had no more patience to decipher. "You're part of the Obsidian bond." "Also yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't expect that to be possible." Most people who performed an Ashrite on me probably didn't. The receiving room had high windows, narrow slits of winter sky, cold enough that our breath was barely visible. The obsidian walls held the heat of the keep poorly in this room, which I had chosen deliberately. "I'm leaving the pack," Rail said. "Not for here. I know, I understand that's not something you would—" He stopped, restarted. "I've submitted a formal separation request. Dravek has denied it twice. I've submitted it a third time, and I don't intend to stop." He looked at me. "I wanted you to know that I stopped standing in circles while things burned. Whatever else I am, I stopped doing that." "That's the minimum," I said. "That's not even a bar. That's the floor." "I know." "Then why are you here?" The silence was long. "Because I owed you the truth in person," he said. "Not a letter, not a second-hand message. You deserved to hear from me that I was wrong and that I was a coward, and that those two things together cost you something I had no right to take." He met my eyes. "I'm not asking for anything. I don't want anything from you. I just needed you to know." I looked at him for a long time. Then I walked to the door and opened it. "Erin will arrange provisions for your journey, wherever you're going." I paused in the doorway. "You were a coward, Rail. You were wrong, and I don't have room in my life anymore for either of those things." I looked back at him once. "But I believe you, and that will have to be enough." I left him there, in the cold room, with the narrow windows and the unforgiving walls. I did not look back. Corvus was waiting in the corridor, not positioned as a guard, simply there, leaning against the wall, in the unhurried way he waited for things. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm all right." I thought about it more carefully. Better than all right, actually. He looked at me with those dark, present eyes. "Come and eat," he said. "Uldra has somehow managed to make the kitchen produce something that is warm and smells significantly better than what we've had for 2 weeks of deep winter." "She threatened them," I said. "Almost certainly." He offered his hand. I took it. We walked toward the great hall, through the obsidian corridors that smelled of wood smoke and stone, with the pack bond warm and steady between us, and my wolf present and certain in my chest, and the keep full of people who had chosen to be here.
Epilogue. The Life in the Stone. 2 years later. The Obsidian Kingdom expanded its walls in the spring of that second year. Not outward, there was no territorial ambition in the expansion, no claim of dominance over neighboring land. Upward, as Corvus's people always built, a new tier of residential chambers carved from the mountain above the current east wing, fitted with the same obsidian floors and high windows, and hearths large enough to stand in. The rooms were for children. We had 2. Twins, born in the hard frost of early winter, with dark hair and eyes that couldn't decide whether to settle on gray or something lighter. They had been born fully Lycan, which Aldra noted with scholarly satisfaction and poorly disguised emotion, was itself a significant piece of data, the first recorded case of children born to an Ashrite survivor after reconstruction. She had written a monograph. It was already being circulated to every pack physician in the Northern Territories. I held them in the obsidian-walled room while Corvus sat in the chair beside the fire, which was where he had been the morning I woke in this keep 2 years ago, and I thought about the specific shape of a life that had been intended to end and had decided not to. Not by accident, not by grace, by choice, by the accumulation of choices, the decision to get up off the floor, the decision to walk north, the decision to believe slowly and carefully in something I had been given no reason to believe in, and to let it be true when it proved itself.
Mira was pack bonded now and leading the Eastern Patrol. Cass had become Iron's second in the military structure. Thessaly had taken up residence in the library and was engaged in what she described as the most important scholarly work of her career and what Aldra described as a 3-year argument in book form. The 16 who had come from Ironhollow had built lives in the mountain, in the Obsidian corridors, in the community that Corvus had built on the radical premise that belonging should be chosen rather than coerced. Dravek had eventually faced an accounting, not military, not dramatic, a formal challenge from within his own pack, led by the 9 warriors who had remained behind and organized quietly over 2 years into something that could not be ignored. He had lost. The Veyron Pack was under new leadership, beginning the slow work of becoming something different. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. Borders were not simple. Politics were not simple. The world between Lycan packs and neutral territories was not simple, and I had come to understand that the work of building something worth living in was not a problem that got solved, but a practice that got maintained. Every day. In the small decisions, in the honest conversations, in the willingness to be seen clearly by someone who has earned the right to see you. Corvus came to sit beside me. He looked at the twins, at their small, sleeping weight, with the same focused attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, which I had come to understand was his most essential quality, his capacity to be genuinely present, not performing presence, not curating it, just here, in this moment, with this particular reality. The West Patrol reported clear passes this morning. Good. And Aldra says the twins will be ready for their first bond assessment in 6 months. She said that to me at breakfast while I was still drinking the first cup of something hot. I told her to come back when I was a person. He made the sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. I had catalogued that sound carefully over 2 years. I had a complete taxonomy.
Seren, he said. Yes? Are you happy? The question was simple enough to be profound. In my experience, simple questions were the ones that had the most weight, the ones that took up the least space and held the most substance. I looked at the fire, at the obsidian walls, at the 2 small faces of the children we had made on the other side of surviving what should have broken me, at the man beside me who had knelt in the mud at his own gate and said, "You are safe," and had then spent 2 years making it true every single day. Yes, I said. My wolf pressed against the inside of my chest, silver gray and warm and entirely herself, and the pack bond hummed its steady frequency. And outside the high windows, the mountain held the cold and the dark and the ancient permanence of things that had been here long before us. And inside the obsidian walls, we were warm. The end. Author's note. This story was built around a particular question. What does it cost a person to have the truest part of themselves declared a problem, and what does it take to recover it? The Ashrite is at its core a metaphor for every act of institutional silencing, the formal processes by which communities tell their most honest members that their honesty is the threat. Seren's wolf was never dangerous. What was dangerous was a wolf that would not pretend not to see what was in front of her. That is the thing they tried to burn, and that is the thing that survived. Recovery in this story does not come from a dramatic reversal or a single transforming moment. It comes from consistency, from a person who shows up the same way every day and lets you arrive at your own truth in your own time. That is the thing Corvus offers, and it is also the hardest thing to write. A love story where the central act is restraint, the love that does not press, the warmth that does not demand. The obsidian walls are real too. They are every community built on honest stone, every space where belonging is earned by choosing rather than by performing. We all deserve a keep like that. We all deserve to come in from the cold. Thank you for being here, wherever in the world you are. The ember in this story is for you.